Hey guys, so it's been a couple of weeks since the last time I did a video feed for YouTube or for Facebook. Honestly, I wanted to take some time off just for Christmas, so I hope you guys had a great one. If you did not, I'm really sorry for that. If you did, hope it was memorable and all that other kind of stuff that you hope for from Christmas. We had a good one, so I hope you did too. I thought we would go ahead and do another chapter review, although this time we are not going to be going from Honeybee Democracy. In reading that, kind of got through everything from that book that would be of interest to you, unless of course you intend to be a beekeeper. If you intend to be a beekeeper, Honeybee Democracy, cover to cover, absolutely a must read for you. However, if you just have an interest in your friend's Facebook live video or YouTube videos, we kind of got as far into that book as we were going to be able to get and still keep it interesting for you. So today I thought that we would go through a different chapter on a different book. This book is going to be Better Beekeeping, and that's from Kim Flottum, who is actually well known in the beekeeper world. So a lot of good knowledge in here. We are going to go through the chapter on wintering your bees. Funny enough, as cold as it is getting right now, we have actually gotten past wintering our bees, and we are now actually in the process of beginning to prepare. We're preparing for spring. We have passed the winter solstice, which was December, I wrote it down, December 21st. So just a few days ago, actually about 10 days ago, was the winter solstice. At this time now, the queen has actually begun to lay eggs again and get ready for spring. So she's laying the eggs. The bees have begun consuming more food in the hive. Specifically, they're consuming more of the honey because they're producing the energy. They are now generating more heat. The last couple of videos, last video specifically, we talked about how the bees generate heat inside the hive and how much heat they are actually able to generate. And they're doing that now in pretty full force because they need to keep the brood warm. They need to get the brood up to the 90 degrees. Hey, Jenny. They need to be able to get up to the 96 degrees. Sorry, not 90 degrees. 96, 98, something like that. But they need to get them warm. And so they're actually doing that process. They're beginning the consumption of the food. So this is the time of year when we get into the high risk factor of being a beekeeper, because now everything that we did in the year leading up, now it's important. Because did we get them enough food? Do they have enough insulation? Are they going to be warm enough? Did we manage the hive properly so that moisture is not getting inside? All of that kind of stuff. All of that matters most right now. Okay? So I thought, and of course I just let go of the book, which means that I lost my place, which is exciting. But I thought that we would go through and look at what it is to get your bees prepared for winter. Here's a fun little picture. As a rule, beekeepers don't do this, but it's always kind of neat when I see somebody that does, just so that you know this guy is completely safe. What they've done, and this doesn't matter to anything, it just happened to land on this page, so excuse me. So I thought I would show you the picture. I totally meant to make coffee and I completely forgot. Doggone it. Oh well. Anyway, they covered him or put on him a queen pheromone, which attracts, of course, other worker bees. And so from multiple hives, they've come to him believing that he is a queen, or at least that he has a queen on him. And so that's why that's why they cover him like that. I bet he's wearing a mask. Anyway, let's see. Wintering Your Bees. That's going to be chapter 5. That's going to be page 140 for those of you who are paying that much attention. All right, so when we talk about wintering bees from the perspective of this book, what we are talking about, and we can see this ish from time to time in the Kentucky area. It doesn't usually get that bad, but it does It gets pretty snowy up here from time to time. So anyway, when we talk about wintering our bees, that's what we talk about. Hey Lily, it's good to see you. And so that's what we're gonna go. That's what we're gonna look into. All right. So some of the things that I was not particularly aware of. Keep this in mind too. I think we've talked about it before. I think I've said it before. I am not an expert on insects. I don't know everything there is to know about honeybees, much less much knowledge about other insects. And frankly, when it comes down to honeybees, there are so many different varieties of the honeybee itself. I'm not keeping up with all of that. I'm pretty familiar with the Italian. I'm getting more familiar with some of the other breeds that are out there. Dad and I did a count the other day. I think we have 4 breeds of honeybee in our bee yard alone. 4, I think it is. Yeah. And I'm not going to go through all of them because, of course, I don't remember their names. Some of them are extremely new. Right now, I know the Italian and the Carnica off the top of my head, but then there are 2 others in our bee yard alone. I don't know what they are. Dad, if you log in and you happen to see my video, remind me what the other 2 are. We'll talk about it later. Anyway, so there are loads of different honeybees out there. I don't know all of them. So this one is a different one for me. And I just read right here, there's a frame. Now, I've held up frames for you when I've been out at the hive, and you have seen that brood pattern there. That's a great laying queen. She's really rocking it out. You want a really full frame just like that. I will note right up here in the corner where you see that it's not capped, in there you see that little shine. That actually looks like they've got honey up in that corner, and they will do that in each of the corners across the top a little bit, and then down at the bottom, of course, they'll do in the corners. Generally speaking, across the bottom of the frame, they'll have brood. A lot of times that's where they'll put their drone. That wax is easier. Those cells are easier to break down, build back up a little bit bigger to make room for the larger body of the drone. So down across the body, the bottom, they will have, usually they'll have brood down there. But around the edges elsewhere, around the three other edges and the corners, all 4 of the corners, they will have honey, or in some cases pollen, or a combination thereof, because they want the honey and the pollen very close, because they're going to mix the 2 together, and that's what they're going to be feeding to the young. So I thought that was kind of neat, and I thought, you know what, here's a picture, I can show you that. But the Carniolans is a type of bee, and she's a darker bee, and she is more acclimated to colder climates. So what that means is she's from a region where they have very short flows, very short springs, basically. And so she's used to, the spring gets here, the flowers start to bloom, and they just go to town. And, well, actually they go to the flowers, not town, for those of you who are literal. But they go straight to work. Boom, 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 boom. They're going to go gather up all that nectar, all of that pollen as much as they can. They'll bring it back to the hive as much as they can. They're very well known for creating an abundance inside of the hive, because in the regions that they are from, the winters get extremely cold. It doesn't say in this paragraph where they are from. I didn't search for where they are from. Frankly, I don't care. We don't have those bees in our yard. I just thought it was kind of neat that there are bees who are more acclimated to colder climates. For our purposes, the Italians actually do just fine. We're not that different in climate from the region that they are, that they originate. So they do fairly well here. Same with the Carnicas that we have in our bee yard. But I think it's neat that there are bees. I'll show you that again. There are bees that have more resistances to the cold, or at least they're better prepared for it. There's a basic winter checklist, okay? And I just thought it would be kind of fun for y'all to hear what we as beekeepers need to make sure that we are keeping up with. I'm gonna hold it up here because every time I look down, of course, I cover my beautiful face, and I know that you guys log in. You don't really care about the bees. You just want to see my pretty face up here. So you're welcome. I'll even pull it back so you can get some of my forehead too. Right. Anyway, so we have to worry about mites and disease control. Now you hear us talking about that quite a bit. So we will, from time to time, we try to stay as far away from chemicals as we possibly can as far as raising our honeybees. Hey Amanda, we try to stay away from putting chemicals on our bees. If they are organic or something like that, we're more inclined, but they need to be certified. But mites, diseases, that sort of thing, when the bees are balled up in the wintertime, they're bundled up in the wintertime, then it's easier for mites, that sort of thing, to have access to the hive. That they're not guarding the door, so the moisture gets in there. That is a breeding ground for diseases, that sort of thing. They've got the temperature inside the hive at a really nice gestation temperature for the mites and diseases, so we have to be concerned about that. The problem with it is during the winter, we can't open the hive and check on them to make sure that that's all kosher. So we actually have to go ahead and take care of them as best we can leading up to winter, and then hope for the best. Now, over the years, you develop a skill level, of course, and you're able to actually keep up with that and feel pretty confident. But in feeling confident, my dad and I are constantly texting with each other. Hey, do you think the girls are all right? Hey, do you think it's too cold? Hey, do you think we did an okay job with whatever? So even with all of that confidence, there's still a lot of doubt, because the last thing you want to do is walk into your bee yard and find them dead. We've done that before. We don't ever want to do that again. 17 hives we lost in one season. It was a 100% loss for us, and almost, in fact, if you've watched the interview video on my YouTube page, I'm going to go ahead and plug that now, Buzzin' Blossoms Bee Farm. For those of you who are not following me on YouTube yet, you should. I've got an interview that I did with my dad, who has been in the beekeeping business for 40-ish years, almost as long as I've been alive. And so we actually talked about that one year where we walked into the bee yard and 17 hives were just empty. It was devastating. So we want to make sure that that doesn't happen again. All right. So mites and diseases is a big thing. We want to make sure that they have more than enough food, more than enough honey, more than enough pollen. We even go so far. I mean, you saw the buckets in the previous videos that I've done. You saw the buckets that we had the sugar syrup with the nutrients and the minerals in there. We had the probiotics that we blast into the hive. We actually just did a treatment. It was a few days ago. I can't remember the last time, what day it was. I was over in Louisville. I don't have a clue. It was right before Christmas. Yeah, it was right before Christmas. But we put, I said probiotic, microbials. Yeah, it's probiotic. It helps with their digestive system, that sort of thing. Actually, I meant to talk about that and completely forgot, so I don't have any of that information sitting in front of me. But so we try to make sure that they have all of that they're going to need, all of that plus that they need going into winter, because of course the last thing we want for them to do is run out of food. If we come through wintertime, we get into the early portions of spring where it warms up enough for us to be able to do our first inspection, which is kind of a hold your breath, here we go, bite the bullet and let's find out what we got kind of day. When we do our first inspection, if we open it up and they've got food inside, that's awesome. Obviously they were able to maintain, they were able to manage with the food that they had. We provided them more than enough. So that sort of thing. You want to make sure that they have enough honey and enough pollen. We've gone so far as to provide pollen and pollen supplement to them. Going into winter, once the flowers stop blooming, they tend to stop taking the pollen, or at least that's been the experience that we've had. They didn't really take the pollen that we provided them right near the hives. However, we've got other methods of distribution to the hives, and so they're able to get that pollen in there. Pollen, of course, we've talked about is their protein source, so we want to make sure that they've got that. A honey diet alone is just energy. They'll actually end up burning their protein inside their bodies, and so thus they'll actually starve themselves to death. They need that protein, building block of life and all that kind of stuff. You remember biology, right? All right, so we want to make sure food and space in the right place. So bees have an inclination, the queen has an inclination specifically to move up. Once she has filled up the bottom super with brood, it doesn't do her any good to stick around. So she tends to move up where there's more space because, of course, she wants to continue laying. And this is the height of the season stuff. This is not wintertime. So food down below that doesn't really tend to do them much good because they're not moving down, they're moving up. So what happens when that brood, they move up for the winter, the brood has hatched, they have that empty super, and then food down below that doesn't do them any good. It's not like they're going out of the hive and finding it. They're actually balled up. So they're moving up. The food needs to be in the right location for them, right? So we don't need an empty super between the food and where the bees are, because again, that's all that empty space that hasn't been climate controlled by the bees. So they're having to go through all of that cold space to get up to the honey, which is also now cold because it's away from the heat source, which is the bees. So you want to have that food in the right location, okay? The only way, by the way, any of those scenarios are going to happen, any of those bad scenarios that I just happened with food being in the wrong place, is if you've just done exceptionally awful beekeeping, okay? That's entirely the beekeeper. The bees naturally will have the food in the location, the brood in the locations that makes most sense. So it's really incumbent on the beekeeper to not be an idiot. Let's see. In the top box, you want to make sure that you've got pollen, honey, and above the cluster of which is, so in the box just above the cluster, which is the ball of bees, the cluster of bees, just above them is where you want to have the pollen and honey. Honestly, if I'd have known that the next sentence said that, I wouldn't have said everything else that I just said. So that's good times. Let's see. Room in the center for bees and food and pollen, with a number of empty cells in the middle. All right, so on top of having as much space filled with honey and pollen as you possibly can, because you want the bees to have enough food for the winter, you also need to make sure that they have enough space for the queen to start laying as soon as the queen needs to start laying. Now, like I said, the inclination is for her to move up. So with that empty super down below her, assuming that the super below her is empty, sometimes it doesn't happen that way. Sometimes we only have them in the one super, whatever the case is. So, but assuming that the super below her is empty, assuming that she has a super below her, she's not going back down to it. She's going to move back up. She's going to keep moving up. So if you have, we'll do art for you. Oh, you know what? Hold on. I can do this. Yeah, there you go. So if you have this bottom super, which is where the queen is to begin with, going into winter, she's laid all of her brood in here. They go into winter. She has stopped laying. All of that brood hatches into young adult bees, right? Well, it's now empty. So the food source is up here, right? So then they move up into it. They consume that food. She starts laying in the area where it used to be food. Now it's empty because they ate it. So they've cleaned it out. She starts laying in that area. She fills it up. She moves up here, which is where we want her to put the excess honey that we're going to take. And she's just going to start laying there. She fills this up. She's going to start laying here. So we take this bottom super, move it up, give her room to move into, and we keep those two just rotating. The two bottom ones, we just rotate those out for her to have places to lay. Does that make sense? I hope it does, because my other option was to draw a diagram for you, and I don't draw, so I hope that was educational for you. Let's see. Let's get back to my list. I do draw. I just don't draw well at all. Yeah, no. So, let's see. Queens, less than 2 years old, less than 1 year old is better. All right, so we've talked about that too. We had the queen. In fact, it was coming out of last winter into this most recent spring, this past spring. We found a queen that was laying only unfertilized egg, which we've discussed. That is the drone, right? So the egg will hatch, but you're not going to get a worker out of it. So we had this queen. She was a prolific layer. We were really excited about her. We're probably going to use her to raise queens moving forward because she does such a great job. And she laid all of her, she used up all the sperm that she had in reserve. Now, that could have been any number of things. She was a prolific layer, so that, obviously she was going through the sperm, and so that's a big deal. But at the same time, maybe she only mated with 5 or 6 drones. There's no real way to tell. So maybe she didn't have as much stored up as would have been nice for her to have stored up. I don't know. Regardless, and maybe she was, honestly, I don't really remember how long we had her prior. Couldn't have been that long, but maybe she was a 2-year-old queen when we got her instead of a 1-year-old queen or a new queen, so maybe she was older. Either way, the older they get, the less sperm they have, because again, they're laying, 1,000 eggs a day? Is that what we talked about? So she lays all of that. After a while, she just runs out. So we have to replace her. Sounds mean, but let's face it. Guess what the bees are going to do? They're going to replace her. So we simply do it this way so that we're able to replace her with a queen of our choosing. Okay? And so you want to make sure that your queen is within a year, 2 at max. You don't want to get much past that because her stock has diminished, and she's probably not going to do a very good job for you as far as laying a big population. So you want to make sure that you've got a good, strong, fresh, new queen. Okay. Productive last season, meeting all criteria. Yeah, so we just talked about that. Performing as expected. Yeah, we just talked about that. All right, so basic procedures. So apparently some locations have issues with mice. I guess we could too. We never have before, but we keep our entrances. This is talking about mouse guards. I'm not entirely certain what that is unless it's just an entrance reducer, which is what we do. We use an entrance reducer to keep our entrances reduced. Its purpose is in the name, for those of you who didn't pick up on that. Anyway, so we use this entrance reducer to keep the entrances small enough for the bees to be able to defend it better during the year. If they've got this big, long, wide entrance, well, while they're defending over in this corner, mice are getting in over in there, or wasps, or whatever the case is, are getting in over here in this corner. So cockroaches, that's a big one. So we keep the entrances small so that the bees have an easier time defending. Okay, let's see. Entrance not blocked with the reducer. I really should read ahead, huh? Anyway, fence from cattle. So we don't have to worry about that, but some places do. I don't know how much you guys know about cows. There are arguments out there that cows are incredibly intelligent creatures. They like to have their heads scratched. Actually, I just saw this thing on TV the other day. This guy built a brush. He put just this steel brush. I mean, he dug a huge footer in and all that kind of stuff because the cows came up to this brush and they're pressing their full weight into this thing, brushing the tops of their head. They are able to, because obviously it's not like they can get to it with their hooves or anything. But they're getting rid of dead skin cells, that sort of thing. They're getting apparently they like to have their heads scratched as much as dogs do. This isn't just anecdotal, by the way. That actually matters because to the bee, the hive, the boxes that we provide them, is representative of a tree trunk that they would, the hollow of a tree trunk that they would have found in nature. We have it much closer to the ground, but still, it serves the purposes, even if it isn't exactly what they would have gone for naturally. Still, it represents the inside, the hollow of a tree. Well, to the cow, it represents a tree trunk on which she can scratch her head. So she's going to press right on into that thing and knock it over. It ticks the bees off, and within a few seconds, it gets a hold of that cow too. I laugh about it because it's not actually happening right now, but what happens with that is every bee that stings that cow, and there will be a lot of them, they all die. You lose a lot of brood because she's going to stomp around, she's going to prance around, all that kind of stuff. So you want to make sure that you're protecting your hives and honestly your livestock from the, livestock from the bees, bees from the livestock, because they're not designed to occupy the same space. So now, if you do, for instance, those of you who are into homesteading and you want to have a hive of bees on your property, of course you're going to have other livestock there. That's cool. The bees will leave them alone when they're foraging. It's when they get close to the hive. The bees don't have the protective instinct. They don't need to protect anything when they're out and about. Protecting herself is just going to kill her. So it just doesn't make any logical sense for me to sting something to protect myself if in stinging that thing I'm going to die. I might as well just fly off as fast as I can and hope for the best. Well, that's her thought too. So she's gonna try to get out of there. If she stings, she probably got smashed or squished or trapped or something like that. So obviously things didn't work out the way that she planned. But at the hive, where the brood is, where the food is, where the best chance of the continuation of that superorganism is, yeah, she's going to sting anything that she feels might be a threat to her hive. Okay, so big fence around if you're dealing with livestock. In some locations, you're not dealing with livestock; you're dealing with Mother Nature. A beehive in the middle of the woods to a deer, especially a young buck who's trying to get some rub going on with his antlers. So protect them from the other creatures. Exterior cracks, chinks, holes sealed. So the bees are going to do a lot of that from the inside. They're going to do a lot of that themselves. In fact, I don't know if you saw the video or not, but in a previous video, we had holes drilled into the front of the hive as the entrance, and we had one in the first and the second super. And during the spring, man, they're coming and going, just boom, 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 boom. They are flying like crazy. And then going into winter, at some point, I looked in and just happened to glance down, and I saw that they had completely covered that the bottom entrance with the top entrance. They had completely covered the top entrance in propolis, so it was completely airtight, watertight, sealed shut. They are not coming and going from there. Neither are pests, neither are parasites, neither are predators. So the bees will lock down their own hive from the inside. However, you are dealing with wood material when you've got these supers, so cracks will form from the outside. We as beekeepers need to be aware of that, because what happens is it rains, water gets into those cracks, it swells, it gets cold and freezes, that expands, blah blah blah. Physics comes into play, and that just makes it worse. And eventually, the structural integrity of your hive is gone. And so now they're at more risk. So good beekeeping is making sure you pay attention to the quality of the equipment. And that specifically and most critically includes your beehives, okay? Frames as well, but going into winter, the frame isn't as big of a deal. But there's nothing more frustrating than having an old frame and you go to pry that puppy out and it snaps on you at the edges, which is what holds it into place and all that kind of stuff. So now you've got this frame of brood, and let's see. Oh yeah, here we go. So this is just the top bar of a frame, but right here, this lip, when it gets put together, that lip holds it in place on the super, inside the super, right? So I've actually, with old frames, been with my hive tool, go to pry that out, and it snaps. So now there's nothing for the frame to rest on, and it's full of brood. so you want to make sure that you're maintaining, taking care of your equipment, paying attention to your equipment, that sort of thing. And so going into winter, that's especially critical for the outside stuff. The supers, the boxes, because that's how air is going to get in. That's how moisture is going to get in. That's how heat is going to get out. That sort of thing. So you want to make sure you're paying attention to that. Let's see. There we go. Screened bottom boards, partially closed, half or so is fine. All right, so with that, and I don't have a bottom board here to show you, but the bottom board, you don't get to see it much in the videos because they're there in every single video if I'm at the hives, but you don't get to, we don't talk about them much because they're the entrance. The entrance is part of the board, the bottom board, and it's just what the hive rests on, so that they have a way in and out, okay? That the bottom of that board is screened because bees are very clean. So they're constantly, they're breaking down the wax and putting the wax back together. They're, dropping pollen. They're cleaning out the cells and all that kind of stuff. Well, when they clean out the cells, all that stuff just falls to the bottom. And so with the screened bottom boards, we actually help maintain the sanitation inside the hive, because if that stuff just lands and stays in the bottom. Now, don't get me wrong, if you have an unscreened bottom board, if you have a solid bottom board, you'll see bees pulling that stuff out and letting it fall off the edge of the front entrance. They'll let that stuff just kind of fall down underneath. So that's great. They will do that. However, those bees that are doing that aren't gathering honey or gathering pollen or gathering water or cleaning up in the cells up top. They're instead utilizing that time in the bottom. So instead, we use these screened bottom boards, and this is, by the way, just one use for the screened bottom boards. But so all of that stuff, a lot of that stuff falls through. So that helps them with cleanliness. Another thing that we do is we actually use grid sheets. So it's just cardboard with grid squares on it. And it helps us with keeping track of mites, varroa mites specifically, because when they get pulled off of the bee's back, our leg biter queen that we're so proud of, they bite the legs off these varroa mites, let them fall down to the bottom. Well, we pull that, and we've covered that thing with a light coat of oil, olive oil, vegetable oil, something like that. And we're able to count how many varroa mites per grid square, and that gives us an idea of what our varroa population is. And so that's another reason for those screened bottom boards. However, going into winter, literally none of that matters. What matters is keeping the moisture out of the hive. So we want to at least partially reduce the amount of exposure from that screen, okay? Heat does rise, so we're not worried about keeping the cold out. So you're not worried about cold getting too much in there, especially if we've got a wind block around. However, moisture absolutely will get in that way. So we want to make sure that we're paying attention there, okay? Let's see. Solid windbreaks installed. So not only did we just now mention that, the windbreak, but we also actually have shown that on previous videos. Honestly, it's real simple. We took some pallets, we stapled tar paper to it, and then we sunk in some posts, screwed in the pallets to the posts, and that's it. I mean, it's a wind block. It keeps that cold north wind it keeps it from hitting the hive directly, which of course sucks out a lot of heat. As long as you keep the wind off and the moisture out, the bees are able to maintain the temperature themselves. Now, we have done insulation in the past, and in some ways we attempt to insulate them now. That's the reason why all of our hives are closer together. Those interior hives are more insulated than the exterior hives. So, we try to do all of that kind of stuff. We do as much to protect all of them as we possibly can. All right. Let's see. Wrapped in insulation, so I really need to start reading ahead. But I'm almost done anyway, so let's just keep it the way we've been doing it. Set to be above and protected from spring floods. Okay, so to be perfectly honest with you, yeah, you want to raise your beehives up to protect it from spring floods if you're in an area that tends to flood. We are not. But you don't want them on the ground anyway, because guess what lives in the ground or on the ground? It's other insects who are very much attracted to that sweet smell coming from the inside of the beehive. So keeping your bees closer to the ground keeps them closer to, when we were in Georgia, it's not so much up here in Kentucky, or up in Kentucky. I'm actually in Indiana right now. It's not so much in Kentucky, but in Georgia, we had the fire ants that we had to deal with. Those of you who are in that area, you know how fun those puppies can be, especially when you happen to be standing in a nest that you didn't realize was there. Yeah, that's fun. But so you want to keep them up and away from pests or predators, okay? And other insects are a big deal. So you always want to keep them raised. And you'll notice, if you haven't noticed before, it's honestly just because we hadn't pointed it out. But next time I'm doing a video out at the hives, pay attention to the fact that every single one of them is on a stand, with very few exceptions. And even with those few exceptions, we'll still put cinder blocks down and raise them up that way, away from the ground level. Another problem with keeping them on the ground is moisture. You ever had plywood or a piece of lumber or even a cinder block on the ground for any length of time? You go to pick it back up. When you look at the bottom of it, on top of everything else that you have down there, the mealybugs and the other insects and creatures that we just talked about, you also have a ton of moisture. I don't know if you've noticed this common theme or not, but when it comes to our beehives, moisture is the big killer. So we want to do everything that we can to, if not keep the moisture out, because sometimes it's not possible to keep the moisture out, you at least want to give them enough airflow that they're able to dry the inside of their hive out much more quickly. Okay, so lift them up. Let's see, we just got two more. You want it to be accessible throughout winter and spring. While it's true that we're not going into the hives, because the moment you open the hive up, all of the heat that's in there that they desperately need right now, all of that heat escapes, you do still need to have access to the hives. Now, all of ours are in a location that we can pretty much just drive right up to them anytime we need to, because there are things that we need to do. We need to go in and just do an external inspection of the hives. We want to make sure that they haven't been knocked over from the wind or local wildlife, that sort of thing. Any number of reasons that you could think of for us to inspect the hives. Just do a drive-by and make sure that everything is looking good from the outside. You need to be able to access your bees. So if you have to hike 4 miles into Sherwood Forest in order to access your bee, I don't know why I said Sherwood Forest, but anyway, you get the point. You don't want to have to trek to your bees. You want to be able to get to them. You want access to them. And that's in the springtime. There's nothing. And we've had these locations where it's like, we're close to a highway, so we're going to go into the woods a little bit to keep the bees off of the highway, which was a smart idea. But the problem is we go into, we refer to it as robbing the hives, because we're going in and we're actually taking the honey from them. So they're robbing the hives. So we go in to rob the hives, right? But we have to walk, it's not too far, 30, 40 yards, but it's into the woods and it's over the rotten, fallen trees, and it's, in the holes that just show up in the woods, and the up and down these little slopes. And the slopes are just enough that it's actually a slope. Like there's this little bump there, but it's low enough that you don't see it until your heel hits it and slips out from underneath you on those wet leaves, and down you go with 40 pounds of honey landing on your chest. I know a couple of folks who have received some broken ribs because of, honestly, it comes right down to poorly located hives. Know the terrain, be familiar with the terrain, make sure that the terrain is accessible and easy to walk on. Let's see. And as bad as that is, by the way, as bad as that sounds to be walking with super full of honey out, Imagine that with a package of, or even a hive of bees. When you go down, they go down, and then they're out. So it's really actually really smart to pay attention to the location that you are putting your bees. It's real estate. Location, location, location. Cover secure. So you want to make sure that the cover is secure. And all of this stuff sounds simple, by the way, but every last one of these things that sounds so simple, if you don't pay it the correct amount of attention, you're no longer, like, your bees are in danger. All right, a good gust of wind when you've got a hive of bees that hasn't necessarily done the sealing job. Now, once they use get the propolis in on those tops, that's why we have the hive tool, so that we can get up underneath them and pry and, you know, break that seal and all that kind of stuff. That stuff is held down really well. But when you're moving bees to a new location, you know, you're doing the inspection and all that kind of stuff. Probably not that same day. That's really a bad idea to move the bees and then open them up. You are guaranteed to get stung at that point. However, you're doing your inspections, you're opening the hive and all that kind of stuff, so that seal isn't always a 100% guarantee. So we always use some tie down straps, or, you know, in our bee yard, you see that we've got some bricks on most of the beehives. And so we want to do something that weighs down those tops, because you do not want those getting blown off. Okay. That's actually, oh dang, I let go of my page. That's it for that list. Hold on, I gotta get back to it. Sorry, guys. Yeah, that's it for that list. That's that basic winter checklist. And as you can tell, it's a checklist of extremely simple stuff. But what do we all know about the simple things that we need to remember when there's a bunch of them? You're gonna forget some of them. So it's nice to have the checklist and pay attention to that. All right. Let's see. Here we go. Here's an image. We were talking earlier about wanting to make sure that they have a pollen source. Right there is a pollen patty. That's just wax paper that you see around the edges there. They can actually chew through that pretty easily. But it gets when you get your pollen patties, you actually separate it with wax paper, much like any of your baked goods, when they have that sticky residue to it, like this stuff does. Let's see. Pollen stores are light in the fall. You can feed pollen. And generally speaking, that's the only time that we're going to do it. Natural is always best. And that's never more true than it is for the bees. So natural nectar that they're going to make into honey is better than anything that we can provide them with the sugar syrup, nutrients, minerals, all that kind of stuff. None of that stuff that we can make is going to be as good as the nectar. Same goes for pollen. We can get all the pollen we want to, or pollen supplement, which is 9 times out of 10 what it is. All of that we want to, it's going to be good, but it's not going to be the best. It may even be great, but it's not the best. The best is going to be the naturally occurring sources of pollen. So in the fall, when they don't have as much pollen as you would like for them to have to get into wintertime, so that after the solstice, when she starts laying, they have all of the food sources. If there's not enough, you don't see enough of that coming in, then you actually want to make sure that you've got a pollen supplement. In previous videos that I've done, you've seen us just kind of like, you know, do flips, because we're so excited about the amount of pollen that's coming in and the different color variations of pollen that's coming in, because that means that they've not only got a rich source of pollen, but they've got several sources of pollen, which means that they're going to have a far more balanced diet. So that's always very exciting for us. Even at that, even with all of that pollen coming in, we were going into winter. What did we do? We provided them with some supplement as well. Why? Because we want to make sure that in the wintertime, when it's time for the bees to start generating all of that heat, they've got enough of the nectar. That's the same reason we did the sugar syrup in those orange buckets. We want to make sure that they've got enough of that going into winter, we don't have to worry about how much food they have. When we just went and did the microbial treatment last week or week before, whatever it was, last week I think it was, But when we went and did that, I went to each one of the colonies, each one of the hives, and lifted at the back to make sure that there was some really good weight to it, because we want to make sure that there. Now, we didn't open it up. It was like 55 degrees, so it would have been fine. Oh, you know what? We did open it up. It was 55 degrees. We needed to make sure that we got that microbial in there. Dad has this new bit for not bit, but piece for his air compressor that allows us to blow that powdered substance into the hive, but it wasn't working. So we ended up having to take the tops off of each of the hives and spreading the treatment that way. So we did actually get to go into the hives on that day, and it was fine. Again, like I said, the temperature was within parameters and all that kind of stuff. So we went into it. We were able to spray that stuff down. I forgot why I got on that tangent. I don't even remember what we were talking about. My mind just totally went blank. Anyway, man, no, it's gone. What were we talking about? Somebody pop it up there. Yeah, no, it's gone. Oh, so I don't know what I was talking about. I mean, I don't know what the purpose of that story was, but either way, when we were able to open up those entrances, in some cases, we saw a bunch of honey up top, which was great. That's very exciting. Every single one of those frames, and there were only 5 of them in the top supers, but each one of them was loaded with honey. In some of them, we saw bees were up there, and so that was good. That was encouraging for us. The bees are in there. They're active. They're moving around. They are alive and well. That's great. In others, in fact, more often than not, we opened it up, and there weren't any bees up top. Now, with the first couple, because again, as good as we are, and as much as we trust our skill, if we were 100% honest, apparently we don't really necessarily trust our skill, because when we opened it up, we didn't see bees. We're like, oh no, do we have a dead out? Did we lose these bees? Oh my goodness. No, they're still down in the bottom super. And we were able to pop that, and we only did it on a couple of them, but we were able to pop that top super up out of the way. We saw a cluster of bees. We're like, oh, cool, there they are, cool, later. So all that means is they just hadn't moved up yet. Great. That means that they haven't needed that store of food yet. Now this was at this point now 2 weeks, because I just realized that today is Thursday. So yeah, it's been 2 weeks ago now, because it was earlier last week and a half then. Fine. But by now they've moved up. Okay. They're eating that. They're generating that heat. She's laying eggs up in that top super. When we get ready to put them into the bigger boxes, these boxes for the spring, we'll take the frames that they're on now that have the honey and the brood, and we will combine that, because those are 5-frame nooks that we have them in right now, and we're going to put them into these 10-frame supers that are here behind me. And so we'll take all 10 of those frames and put them in there, and we'll space it out so that she's got plenty of room to lay, and she's just going to go ham. We'll actually give her 2 of these boxes, because she'll fill up those 5 or 6 frames that are down below, and then she'll move up into the top one again, and hopefully just give us a ton of foraging bees. Okay, so that's actually pretty exciting. Let's see. Take care of the bees that take care of the bees that go okay, so there's a sentence in here that it's actually kind of funny. It says, take care of the bees that take care of the bees that go into winter. And that's actually really important. I mean, let's face it, if the bees that are nursing the future bees aren't well nourished themselves, how good are they going to be in taking care of the winter young, right? So you want a strong, healthy, vibrant winter colony. The best way to ensure that is take care of the bees that are adults while the winter bees are still larvae. So yeah, no, that makes sense. And that's just a caption down here at the bottom of the page, right? Let's see. What else we got? Probably going to go ahead and call it here in just a minute, guys. here's neat. Okay, now here's a neat couple of images. Negative 8.7 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm gonna point to it, but you can see on the inside of the colony, they've got some spots of hot, right? Next to it is an image of negative 25.4 degrees Fahrenheit. Look how hot that is. That is crazy. The inside of that hive is hot. Based on everything that we have discussed, what that tells us is she has started laying. They have passed the winter solstice. They are now getting ready for spring. It takes 21 days for an egg to become an adult bee and crawl out of the cell. From there, it takes 2 weeks for her to have wings strong enough to fly. So 5 weeks before she needs to be flying, the queen needs to be laying. Make sense? Not to mention, we will have been coming through the end of winter. Those winter bees have gotten pretty old, so they're not going to be doing very well as far as gathering for the hive. So she has to start laying early in. So negative 25 plus degrees, and look how hot. That's crazy. Next to it is negative 23.4, and so same thing. It's still pretty hot. But you can also see down below how blue that is. That's obviously where it's cold. That is because they have moved up. The food source was here. They were down here. They were moving up to get into the food source. But here they have gone ahead and moved all the way up because there's nothing down below for them anymore, right? Negative 17 degrees, and I'm not reading the caption yet. Negative 17, and then down below is negative 22. Okay. The caption here says unwrapped hives on a near 0 degree Fahrenheit day. Oh, that's this bottom picture right here. And then here we go. Infrared photos of footsteps in the snow showing large cluster in the red area occupying all the top box. Yeah, so basically everything we just said is in that caption. Okay, that's just extremely neat. We've already shown you a frame with honey in the corners. Frame. This frame is a gold mine of reserves. Oh, it has honey and pollen in it. Okay, so I mean, you guys have seen this. You've seen it live with me when we've been doing the videos at the beehive. But there you can just see on the center, light and dark shades of brown and yellow and maybe a little bit of orange in there. That's all just different shades of pollen. And then down in that bottom corner, you can actually see honey. And so that is a frame that they've put together in the brood chamber. So because it's not on the frame of brood itself, it's in actually one of the outside frames. So of the 5 frames, the outside 2 frames will be that in pollen or honey, and that acts as an insulation of sorts for the brood inside. So the interior 3 frames, and then when you get to a 10 frame super, of course, you know, you're gonna have even more brood. But the outside 1 or 2, on each side 1 or 2 frames deep will be that pollen and honey mixture like that. Okay, and that's because they need both in order to be able to make the bread that they feed to the bees, to the larvae. Okay, guys, I hope you've enjoyed it. Hadn't been any talking from you guys, no questions or anything like that. So hopefully you've been enjoying the video. I'll get it onto YouTube here in just a minute. If you would, please take a look at my YouTube page if you haven't before. It is Buzz and Blossoms Bee Farm. You can actually, I'll share the link onto my Facebook as well. like this video, subscribe to my channel, hit that little bell so that you'll be made aware whenever a new video is uploaded. And I would love to hear from you guys. So you can reach out to me on Facebook, you can reach out to me on my email, that sort of thing, whatever the case is. Any questions that you have, you can always send them to me, and I would love to be able to address those questions in my videos. That being said, you guys have yourselves a great night and a happy new... Oh, that's why you guys aren't talking to me. Y'all are all getting drunk, aren't you? Nice. Y'all enjoy yourselves. Happy New Year to you. We'll talk soon.